Blake Thompson surveyed Boston Luxury Motors' gleaming showroom with the practiced eye of a predator assessing its hunting ground. The Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and Bentleys, arranged under perfect lighting, weren't just cars. They were status symbols reserved for those who belonged in his world. And Blake knew exactly who belonged. "Mr. Hoffman is coming at 2, he reminded his sales team during their morning briefing. "He's looking at the Aston Martin Valkyrie. That's a $5 million commission, people. Remember, these aren't just customers. They're connoisseurs. Treat them accordingly." When the glass doors slid open at 11:43 a.m., Blake's radar immediately activated. The girl who entered couldn't have been more than 17 or 18. Black, with braided hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans, white sneakers, and an ordinary grey hoodie. No designer labels, no statement accessories, nothing that signaled belonging in a space where the cheapest vehicle started at $150,000. Blake exchanged knowing glances with Greg, his assistant manager. Another time waster, probably some local college kid who wanted Instagram photos pretending to shop for luxury cars. "I'll handle this," Blake muttered, straightening his brioni tie as he approached, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked, positioning himself to subtly block her path further into the showroom. The girl looked up from the Lamborghini Huracan she'd been examining. Despite her casual appearance, there was something composed about her demeanor, a quiet self-assurance that momentarily gave Blake pause. "Yes, I'd like to purchase a car," she said, her voice carrying the refined enunciation of private education. "I'm interested in seeing what you have in stock." Blake's smile tightened. He'd heard this script before, young people playing pretend, wasting valuable time he could spend with serious buyers. "Our vehicles start at $150,000, he said pointedly. "The model you're looking at is $325,000. "I'm aware of the pricing," she replied calmly. "I'd specifically like to see the McLaren Senna if you have one available." Blake nearly laughed out loud. The McLaren Senna, a limited production hypercar worth over $1 million, was kept in the private viewing room for serious clients only. "Look, sweetheart," he said, dropping all pretense of professional courtesy. "This isn't a museum. We don't do tours for the homies. These cars are for buyers only." Something flickered in the girl's eyes, a brief shadow of hurt quickly masked by dignity. "I am a buyer. My name is Alexis Carter, and I'm prepared to make a purchase today." Blake crossed his arms, making no effort to hide his skepticism. "Carter, huh? And where exactly does Ms. Carter get million-dollar car money, selling Girl Scout cookies in the hood?" A few customers browsing nearby glanced over, some looking uncomfortable at Blake's tone, others smirking in shared contempt. "That's not really relevant to the transaction," Alexis replied, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. "I'd like to speak with the owner if you're not willing to assist me." "Richard Mason doesn't waste time with hood rats playing dress-up," Blake snapped, patience exhausted. "Now I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I call security. Real customers don't appreciate the ghetto aesthetic, bringing down the ambiance." The showroom had grown uncomfortably quiet, the handful of browsing customers and sales staff all watching the confrontation unfold. Alexis reached into her crossbody bag and removed a folded document, which she calmly handed to Blake. "Perhaps this will clarify my intentions," she said. Blake unfolded what appeared to be a cashier's check. His eyes widened involuntarily as he registered the amount, $1,500,000 made out to Boston Luxury Motors. For a moment his confidence wavered, but years of ingrained prejudice quickly reasserted themselves. "Nice try," he said, with a derisive chuckle, holding the check up to the light as if examining a counterfeit bill. "Where'd you get this, huh? Photoshop skills on point, I'll give you that. What's next? You gonna tell me you're Beyoncé's secret daughter or something?" He tossed the check back at her dismissively. "We don't have time for games. Exit's behind you. Use it before I have you escorted out." Alexis carefully retrieved the check from the floor where it had fallen, her movements deliberate and dignified. The showroom remained uncomfortably silent as she tucked it back into her bag. "I understand," she said quietly. "Thank you for your time." No angry outburst, no scene, just a poised withdrawal that somehow made Blake more uncomfortable than any confrontation would have. As the glass doors closed behind her, he turned to find Richard Mason, the dealership's owner, watching from the mezzanine office with a furrowed brow. "Problem with that customer?" Richard called down. Blake waved dismissively. "Just some local kid wasting our time. Tried to flex with a fake check. I handled it." Richard nodded, though something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Hoffman's coming at 2. Make sure the Valkyrie is prepped." "Already on it," Blake assured him, pushing the incident from his mind as he returned to what he considered real work with real customers. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, Boston's autumn sunlight glinting off the polished surfaces of the luxury vehicles arranged in the showroom. Blake arrived early, reviewing the day's appointments while sipping his artisanal coffee. Yesterday's confrontation was entirely forgotten, just another forgettable interaction in a career built on catering to wealth and excluding everyone else. At precisely 9:30 a.m., a vehicle pulled up outside the dealership that caused every head in the showroom to turn. Even in a space dedicated to automotive excellence, the arrival of a Rolls-Royce Phantom extended wheelbase commanded attention. But it wasn't just any Phantom, it was a bespoke model in deep midnight blue with silver accents, instantly recognizable to anyone who followed financial news or luxury lifestyle publications. Only one person in Boston owned that particular vehicle. "Holy shit," Greg whispered beside Blake. "Is that—" "Marcus Carter," Blake confirmed, his coffee suddenly forgotten as anxiety twisted his stomach. Marcus Carter, tech visionary, venture capital kingmaker, philanthropist, and one of the few black billionaires in America. A man whose net worth exceeded the GDP of several small nations. A man whose patronage could make or break Boston luxury motors with a single purchase, or a single negative word in the right circles. Blake straightened his tie and smoothed his hair, adopting his most welcoming expression as the Rolls-Royce's chauffeur opened the rear door. Marcus Carter emerged with the confident ease of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. Tall, fit, and impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit, he carried himself with the quiet authority that came from reshaping entire industries. "Mr. Carter," Richard Mason called out, practically sprinting down from his office to greet the unexpected VIP. "What an honor to have you visit Boston Luxury Motors. Had we known you were coming, we would have prepared a proper welcome." Marcus Carter's handshake was firm, his smile polite but reserved. "I prefer to arrive unannounced, Mr. Mason. It gives me a more authentic experience of how your business operates." Something in his tone caused Blake's professional smile to falter slightly. There was an edge there, a purpose that suggested this wasn't a casual shopping visit. "Of course," Richard agreed enthusiastically. "May I personally show you our collection? We recently acquired a Ferrari LaFerrari Aperta that might Actually," Marcus replied, his gaze shifting to Blake. "I believe I should speak with your sales manager first. Mr. Thompson, isn't it?" Blake stepped forward, extending his hand. "Blake Thompson, sir. It's an honor to meet you. However, I can assist you today." "You can start," Marcus interrupted, not accepting the handshake, "by explaining why you called my daughter a hood rat yesterday and accused her of presenting a fraudulent check." The showroom went deathly silent. Blake's extended hand froze in midair, his mind racing to process what he'd just heard. Daughter? Yesterday? The only black person he'd interacted with yesterday was... The realization hit him with physical force. "Your daughter?" he managed, his voice suddenly hoarse. "Alexis Carter," Marcus confirmed. 17 years old, honor student at Phillips Academy, founder of a STEM program for underprivileged youth in Roxbury. And yes, fully authorized to access her trust fund for the purchase she attempted to make yesterday. Blake's face drained of color as the magnitude of his error became clear. "Mr. Carter, I had no idea that she was my daughter," Marcus finished, his voice level but carrying an undercurrent of tightly controlled anger. "Would that have changed how you treated her? Would her humanity have suddenly become apparent if you'd known her father was wealthy?" Richard Mason had gone pale beside them, clearly calculating the potential damage to his business. "Mr. Carter, please accept our most profound apologies. Mr. Thompson's behavior does not reflect our company's values." "Doesn't it?" Marcus challenged, gesturing around the showroom. "I see no diversity among your sales staff. I note the customers receiving attentive service this morning all fit a particular demographic profile, and I've heard from several acquaintances about similar experiences here." He turned back to Blake. "Tell me, Mr. Thompson, how do you determine who deserves respect in your showroom?" Blake struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't dig his hole deeper. "Sir, we cater to a high-end clientele. We have certain standards." "Standards based on appearance," cut in, "on assumptions about who has money and who doesn't, on lazy stereotypes about race and worth." The accusation hung in the air, impossible to deny and damning in its accuracy. Blake had spent years perfecting his ability to sort people by their perceived value, never questioning the biases that informed those judgments. "Where is Alexis now?" Richard asked, desperate to salvage the situation. "We'd be honored to personally apologize and ensure she receives the vehicle she was interested in, perhaps with a significant courtesy discount." "Alexis is at school, where 17-year-olds belong on weekday mornings," Marcus replied, "and she's no longer interested in purchasing from your dealership. In fact, she's suggested I buy the entire building and convert it into a community center for the neighborhoods you seem to hold in such contempt." Blake swallowed hard, visions of unemployment and professional disgrace flashing before his eyes. Boston was a small city in the luxury sales world. Word would spread, his career would be over. "Mr. Carter," he began, desperation evident in his voice, "I made a terrible mistake. If you'd allow me to apologize directly to your daughter." "Apologies are cheap," Marcus replied, "especially when motivated by fear rather than genuine remorse. I'm more interested in correction than contrition." He turned to address Richard Mason directly. "I'm not going to buy your dealership or ruin your business, Mr. Mason. That would be too easy and accomplish too little. Instead, I have a different proposition." Richard nodded eagerly, relief evident in his expression. "Anything, Mr. Carter?" The Marcus Carter Foundation runs a mentorship program for children from economically disadvantaged neighborhoods in Boston. For the next 6 months, I want Mr. Thompson here to volunteer 20 hours per week working with these children. Blake blinked in confusion. "You want me to babysit?" Marcus's expression hardened. "I want you to learn what you clearly never have, that human value isn't determined by zip code, bank balance, or skin color, that the hood rats you dismiss might be future doctors, engineers, artists, or business leaders if given the same opportunities you take for granted." He turned back to Richard. "As for your dealership, Mr. Mason, I expect comprehensive diversity training for all staff, revision of your customer service protocols, and a substantial donation to educational programs in Roxbury and Dorchester. I'll have my foundation contact you with specifics." The request, which everyone present understood was actually a demand, left no room for negotiation. Richard nodded quickly, undoubtedly calculating that the cost of compliance was far less than the alternative. "Of course, Mr. Carter, we'll make these changes immediately." Marcus turned his attention back to Blake, who stood frozen in the spotlight of his own prejudice. "Mr. Thompson, your first shift starts tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the Roxbury Community Center. Don't be late." With that, Marcus Carter returned to his Rolls-Royce, leaving behind a shaken dealership and a sales manager whose carefully constructed world had just collapsed around him. "Mr. Thompson," the director, a warm but no-nonsense woman named Dr. Harriet Jenkins, began. Mr. Carter has explained the circumstances that bring you to us. While I have my personal opinions about your behavior, I am more interested in what you can contribute during your time here. Blake shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure what exactly I'm supposed to do. I sell luxury cars. I don't have experience with kids from these kinds of neighborhoods. These kinds of neighborhoods? Dr. Jenkins repeated, her tone making it clear she was noting the continuation of his prejudiced language. Perhaps that's precisely why you need to be here, Mr. Thompson. You'll be assigned to our after-school program, helping with homework, supervising activities, and most importantly, building relationships with young people you've spent your career prejudging. The prospect filled Blake with dread, but he nodded stiffly. His career, and what remained of his reputation, depended on completing this sentence successfully. "Hey, mister, you look like you gotta go to the bathroom or something," observed a small voice beside him. Blake looked down to find a boy of about 8 standing there, head tilted in assessment. Despite the center's clearly limited resources, the child's clothes were clean and neat, his sneakers well worn but carefully maintained. "I'm fine," Blake replied automatically. "Just observing." "That's boring," the boy declared. "I'm Thomas. I need help with my multiplication tables. Ms. Jenkins said you're supposed to help us." Before Blake could formulate a response, Thomas had grabbed his hand and was pulling him toward a study table in the corner. For the next hour, Blake found himself drilling multiplication facts with a kid whose determination and quick mind gradually broke through his uncomfortable reserve. "You're pretty smart for a fancy white dude," Thomas observed as they finished the last set of problems. "Most of them act scared when they come here, like we got some disease they might catch." The casual observation, delivered without malice but with piercing accuracy, landed like a slap. Blake had indeed been behaving exactly as Thomas described, as if poverty might be contagious, as if the children's circumstances somehow reflected their worth or potential. I don't," Blake stammered, suddenly aware of how transparent his discomfort had been. Thomas shrugged. "It's okay. My mum says people fear what they don't understand. You just don't understand us yet." The simple wisdom from an 8-year-old left Blake momentarily speechless. "I suppose that's true," he finally managed. "You coming back tomorrow?" Thomas asked, gathering his homework sheets. Despite himself, Blake nodded. "I'll be here." "Cool. I need help with division next. It's tricky." In the days that followed, Blake found himself drawn into the rhythms of the community center, almost despite himself. He learned the children's names, their strengths and struggles, their dreams and fears. He discovered that Thomas wanted to be an architect, that his mother worked 2 jobs to keep them in a safe apartment, that his father had been killed by a drunk driver 3 years earlier,